by cash, and I think it's going to be free.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, if we could have your attention for just a moment. The immediate family members will be seated shortly. At this time, we do kindly ask that you please take this opportunity and check any electronic equipment such as cell phones and kindly ensure that they are silenced. And from this point on, we kindly ask that you please refrain from any additional conversation. Thank you.
Before we begin this afternoon, I would ask that if you do have a cell phone, if you would actually turn it to off. Following the service at the cemetery, everyone is welcome back to my dad's home, 70 Weatherly Drive in Salem. It's Unit 301. Those who want to make a charitable contribution in my mom's memory may do so to the Peabody Essex Museum Guides Memorial Fund. From the book of Isaiah. The voice says, "Cry out," and I say, "What shall I cry?" All flesh is grass, and all its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades when a wind of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God shall endure forever. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binoteshe yarbitzeni al mei menuchot yenahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek lema'an shemo. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He has me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He guides me on paths of righteousness. He revives my soul for the sake of his glory. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your staff and your rod do comfort me. You set a table in sight of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall abide in the house of the Lord forever. We've come together this afternoon sharing sorrow, to bid farewell to Reeva, to our mom, to our Safta, to our friend. We recall the blessing of her life, and we thank God for all that was good and true in her life, and for the precious memories which will always endure. Eternal God, Creator, merciful Parent of all your children, bowed in grief, seek light to dispel the dark gloom which threatens to overwhelm them. Be gracious to those who mourn Reeva, for they are in distress. Bless them with your compassion, ease their burden of sorrow, send them light and peace, for it is written, "Fear not, as I am with you, be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will sustain you with my power." And let us say, Amen. Like my really cherished colleagues here today, Rabbi Kazdan and Rabbi Polakov, I can't tell you how many hundreds and hundreds, and maybe now even 1,000 times, I've heard it said of someone, they love their family most of all, their family and particularly their grandchildren. And that was certainly true of my mom. But it wasn't the only thing that was true of her, because quite frankly, she loved everyone. And although in just a moment we're going to hear from family members, I would ask you in the weeks and months to come, when you see in particular my dad, I hope you will share with him your own stories of my mom, because I know that if you knew her, you probably have Reeva stories. And so I hope that, although we'll be speaking today, you will all have a chance to share with her stories of your own. I'm first going to call up my dad.
Thank you all for coming in a very difficult time for us all. Reeva Sagal. I arrived at my parents' home in Framingham, Massachusetts, in the early summer of 1958, fresh out of Cornell and getting ready to prepare for initial qualifying exams at graduate school at MIT. I called my cousin, who had recently finished Tufts Dental School, and asked if he knew any girls. Well, he did, know one, and he gave me her telephone number. I called the girl and asked if she would like to go with me to an outdoor Wellesley College performance of a Greek play, which one I've long since forgotten. She agreed since, as she told me later, she'd been planning to see that play, and this is the way it would be free. A year later, there we were, newlyweds at age 22, full of hormones and a bit bewildered at acting like real grown-ups, living in a renovated old building on Washington Street in Brookline. Between our combined income of about $6,000 a year and 100% subsidized groceries from her father's store in Cambridge, we felt pretty flush most of the time. Our friends were all newly married graduate students and medical residents and so on. We're all in the same boat. Veal Parmesan at Simeone's near MIT, long since gone, was $1.99, and our rent was $90 a month. So no problems financially. Reeva commuted with Lois Resnick, now one of our oldest friends, to their teaching jobs in Norwood, and I took the T to MIT every day. 3 years went by. I finished at MIT and took a very pregnant Reeva, kicking and screaming out of Massachusetts to New Jersey, where I had a job at Bell Labs. We moved into a garden apartment in Summit, New Jersey, this time surrounded by the same type of people we knew in Brookline, except now they had real jobs and mostly had new babies. We met other people who remained our oldest friends to this day. For the next 25 years, my career lurched sideways and sometimes forward in random directions. We eventually had 3 sons. Full disclosure, Roger was going to be the girl. When Roger started school, Reeva, not being the type to sit around, went back to college to get a certificate in learning disabilities, combined with her master's in teaching from Harvard, that enabled her to start a 25-year career, mostly at the high school level, in evaluating, planning, and managing teenagers with learning disabilities. Some were minor, at least to my ignorant eyes. Others had devastating disabilities, physical, emotional, or cognitive. She was amazing at that job. At her high school, she initiated a program for job placement for young people who had aged out of the responsibilities of the high school and the school system. She nagged, cajoled, threatened, and otherwise coerced local employers like supermarkets to hire young people who had graduated from the high school special ed program. At the time, this was new, such job opportunities, and she had to overcome many obstacles to achieve what she did, enable disabled young adults to provide for their own support outside a sheltered environment, which was the norm for that day. I watched in disbelief when she managed to help so many people start normal adult lives. At age 50, just 35 years ago, and as some of you know, today would have been her 85th birthday. 35 years ago, she encountered the first of several severe health problems that she faced for the rest of her life. Following a trip to Israel to visit our son Doug, who was in the first year of the rabbinical seminary in Jerusalem, she came down with a devastating case of viral encephalitis. She was in a coma in an ICU for what seemed like weeks. And when finally coming out of that and into rehab, the medical predictions were that she would never again be able to work or play tennis ever again. I recall to this day a neurologist getting up from behind his desk and making a tennis racket motion with his arm, explaining that she would never have enough coordination to ever play tennis. Well, she fooled them all, as many of you know. She went back to work about 6 months later and started playing tennis again for the rest of her life, which she made up with enthusiasm, which she lacked in skill. Later, she had to deal with other medical issues, including lymphoma and mysterious retina damage, which left her a one-eyed tennis player for the rest of her life. Hit the ball to her right side, forget about it. She also developed a complex blood disorder, which led to a heart attack, stroke, and the required care of a bevy of hematologists who kept on top of the disorders that changed its stripes over the years. And as many of you know, in recent years, she faced loss of short-term memory and some cognitive loss as well. So anyway, when we finally escaped from New Jersey and moved to the North Shore after about 20 years ago, she signed on to be in an early class for docent training at the PBS Museum, which had just gone through its first major expansion. Until the pandemic shut it down, Reeva led tours several times a week. She was famous for never saying no to a last-minute call to lead a tour. Her enthusiasm for the museum and for art was infectious, and museum visitors loved to be with her. There were only a few things that would take her away from being at the museum. One was going to Florida in the winter months, always going with a little less interest than I had. With much greater enthusiasm, we would visit our far-flung grandchildren, accepting the need to also visit our sons and daughters-in-law as an unavoidable requirement of seeing our grandchildren. Reeva loved to travel, and we went to many places in Europe and Asia together. On those trips, she inevitably became friends with everyone in a day or two, with her outgoing nature and genuine interest in everyone and everything around her. Usually people on those trips got to know me as Reeva's husband, the one who was not so interested in hanging out with them or learning about their grandchildren. So, of course, I loved Reeva. After 62 years, I had better have loved her. But I also admired her more than anyone I've ever known. She never let adversity get in her way. She brought up 3 accomplished men who were Mensches. She was a devoted daughter and sister. And as many here know, she was a loyal friend who could be relied upon. She was friendly and respectful toward everyone she met. At Mass General over the last few weeks, the nurses loved her. Why, in spite of her illness, she was always friendly and appreciative of everything they did for her. When she was able to talk and communicate, she wanted to know from the nurses about their careers and asked always about their love lives. That was vintage Reeva. So now I and we will go on without her. Hard to face after all those years, but they were good ones.
I just want to express my gratitude to Rabbi Lila Kazdan. I met Lila 5 years ago, and who knew at the time that she would be there with us at the most difficult times in our lives. And I am grateful. My mom really thought so highly of you. And 2 months ago, you made the worst day in her life bearable and meaningful. And we all are so grateful to you for being part of our lives in this way. There's no Hebrew word for role model. The closest I could come up with is moreh derech, which is kind of means one who shows the way. And I confess to you today, I've never really given much thought to my mother as a role model. She was my mother, right? But in the last 48 hours, I've come to realize how much of a role model she really was. Her friendliness, her kindness to everyone she met, her ability to form lifelong and lasting friendships, her loyalty to those around her, her fierce devotion to family, her generosity, her love of teaching and learning, her perseverance, and her courage. In all these ways, I have to say, I've only now realized she is a true role model. A moreh derech. But I want to make sure that what's also acknowledged today, and I know that my mother would want this too, is the extraordinary efforts of my dad, Matt Sagal, who I also realize now is a true role model. It should be acknowledged that for the last many months, Dad devotedly cared for Ted as well as for Mom, almost single-handedly nursing them both through their terrible illnesses, literally until the end. Quite honestly, taking care of everything, whether it was medical or financial. And actually, Dad, I don't know how you did it. But I am enormously proud of you for what you did, both for Ted and for Mom, who tragically survived one another only by 2 months, both dying on the eve of their birthdays. And you did it uncomplainingly and with extraordinary care. And you provide an example for the rest of us. Proverbs 22:6 declares, Mimena yasur lo yazkin, ki gam darko ki al na'ar chanoch. It's the closest I could come to a phrase about role models. Show the younger generation the proper way, so when they too are old, they will follow it. So Mom and Dad, you have done just that, and we, your family, can only hope to follow your example.
I stand up here primarily to confess some errors. Not natural to me. A little late, but my mother drove us crazy sometimes. Why put a gloss on it? And she drove us crazy. She drove me crazy in two particular ways. A, her insistence that something terrible was about to happen. And B, her insistence that the most important thing is family. She would say to my brothers and myself, you have each other. You have to, you're all each other has. Well, that was ridiculous. Of course, the disasters never happened. My mother was famous among my friends in high school for if I wasn't home at a reasonable hour, say 8 p.m., she would start calling around to their houses. No, Mrs. Sagal, Peter's not here. And my impatience with this insistence that disaster was around every corner, if you didn't constantly worry about it, it was almost as if the worrying would keep it away, led me in my life to a stubborn refusal to admit that anything bad, in fact, would happen. I was at, as some of you know, the Boston Marathon when the bombs went off. I was nearby, and everybody was like, "There's a bomb." And I was standing there 100 yards away, the smoke in the air, going, "Nah, it wasn't a bomb. It couldn't be a bomb." There I was in the middle of this global disaster, arguing with my mother. What's interesting, of course, is there are a lot of wonderful stories and charming stories about my mother, which I hope you will share later. This is not a particularly charming one, but it's the one I've been thinking of. It's because it's a story when disaster actually struck, and it was more or less my fault. It's when my first marriage finally fell apart. And that was not something that happened in my family. Marriages do not fall apart. We do not allow that. My mother and father, as you know, were married for 62 years. That was the model. We don't do that. And I did it. I screwed it up. And I had to call and tell them, which was not a pleasant time. And I honestly feared that my mother would not only judge me, forgive me for that mistake, but that she would take some satisfaction in being right. She did not. Of course she did not. She offered me, as she has offered all of you at similar times, nothing but love and unconditional support in whatever I needed, and she and my father would be there for me. And as that particular adventure played out, it turns out to be something that I, in fact, needed. She did eventually enjoy the opportunity to tell me what she thought of my first wife, but you know, who can begrudge her that? And of course, in the end, I think, in regard to her conviction that a disaster would soon come, today, we cannot really argue with her. I can show you my frequent customer card from Stanetsky Chapels. 3 more, we get a free one. The other thing, though, about family, and the insistence that it was the most important thing. You all know she had a lot of enthusiasms and a lot of affections. She loved her friends. Many of you are here. Many others are watching. She loved teaching and being a docent, both at the Peabody Essex, I know one of her colleagues is here, and also down at the Moat Aquarium, where, according to a friend of mine who also visits Sarasota, she is something of a legend. She loved traveling, she loved tennis, she loved a lot of things, but more than anything, she loved family. She believed that it was the most important thing in the world. And she was right about that too. And I, standing here, regret every time I ever argued with her, thought there was something more important to do than to be with family. And this may have a little bit to do, not only with my eventual age and wisdom, but with also the fact that I have finally achieved a pretty wonderful family of my own, sitting here, my wife Mara, and our little baby Elliot, her latest grandson, who will grow up hearing lots of stories about her. So, a little late. Oh, there is one thing. She would have loved this because you're all here. We were sitting around last night having dinner, all of us who were here, and I couldn't stop thinking how much she would like that, how much she would love that we were all together. In fact, soon after my uncle died, her brother died, she started planning the next big family get-together. Well, Mom, it happened sooner than we had hoped. I honestly believe if you had given her the deal, you can get everybody together for your birthday. There's one small catch, though. She might have gone for it. So I hope that when we all go back to my father's apartment, which, by the way, if you don't know, is a 1/4 mile from here, Once more, my mother making it a little more convenient for everybody because she could. I hope that you, instead of mourning her, or, well, in addition to mourning her, let's say instead of being too sad, remember that she would have loved to have you all there and having a good time. And please eat. Please eat. There is one thing, though, that I think my mother was wrong about. Mom, you should have had the desserts. Although, I'm sure she's very proud to have fit into a petite coffin. By the way, I tried that joke out on my father. He laughed, so I felt comfortable sharing it with you. Thank you all for being here. Like I said, this is where I hope the Goyim have it right, and she's looking down from the throne of heaven. I'm sorry. I have to stop. I just imagined her talking to Jesus. So what do? She would be thrilled to have you all here. She would be delighted to see you. She'd want you to eat and have a good time. So I hope that we can honor her memory that way. Thank you all for being here.
So I thought I would, as I was thinking about what I was going to say today, I was trying to think of an attribute of my mother that maybe wouldn't be mentioned by the other family members. And actually I was wrong about that because my father kind of touched on it. But I wanted to talk to you about how physically and mentally tough my mother was. For somebody who would legitimately drive us crazy with worry, when it came to herself, she really was a rock. When she got sick 35 years ago, I guess, I have this very distinct memory of after she got to after she was in the hospital, and then after the hospital, she had to go to a rehabilitation center to learn how to speak and walk, and I don't even remember how long she was there, but I remember a dinner that my father had at our house after she came back. In fact, she was still in the rehab, but she was at the point where she was allowed to go home for a day, and then he had to take her back, as I remember correctly. And we were sitting around the dinner table, and I looked at her, and I remember her head was still shaved from the surgery. And I remember she still had a scar on her scalp that was visible. And she couldn't really speak. And she certainly couldn't talk. She just sort of, as I recall, just sort of sat there. And I have this distinct memory of sitting at the table looking at her and thinking she's never going to come back from this. This is who she is now as a 16 or 17-year-old. And I was dead wrong. Dead wrong. As you all know, she got better and stronger and played tennis and exercised and swam in those cold, cold waters off the North Shore. And never once did I ever hear her complain about how hard it was for her to come back. I never, ever heard it. If it was hard, if she felt challenged, if she felt like it was never going to happen, she didn't share it with me. So, my wife Lisa and my daughter Amelia. My daughter Autumn is not here. I was thinking of her because she has a really good soft impression. that maybe she'll share some other time, but I regret that you couldn't hear it. But anyway, Amelia and Lisa came up with what we would call softaisms, these kind of weird, funny word sayings that she would come up with that you knew it came from her, and you wouldn't hear it from anybody else. So I thought I would just tell you what some of these were. So here's the first one. What do you want to do? You want me to stand on my head and spit wooden nickels? There's enough food here to feed Coxey's army. I've got more, insert here, than Heinz has pickles. She would compliment you by telling you, I hate to tell you this, but you're, in the case of my children, you're gorgeous. To make a short story long, terrifioca, naturific, absatively posolutely, knock on wood, Kanahara. So, what's new? Any news? This was a contribution from Lauren. What's the matter? From here to east or west Jabru. If she thought something was funny or something was funny, she would say, that's a riot. We'll miss you, Mom.
Hello, everyone. So I will be speaking on behalf of the grandchildren. My sisters, Michal and Kira, very much wish they could be here, but we decided to put something together. We decided to put something together last night to say. When I started writing this, I couldn't really think of how to start it. I mean, Safta was such a big part of our lives. So I typed up probably 5 different things and backspaced, and Kira actually wrote, I think, a pretty good summarization of what it was like to have Safta as our grandmother. So these are Kira's words right now. I don't think Safta got enough credit. She also, frankly, didn't give herself enough credit. As wild and crazy as she could be, it was the quiet, small moments that made me realize just how special she was. I picture us at the kitchen table drinking coffee in the morning after a Passover Seder, or even times where Safta just cracked me up. I can't even tell you why, but we would just sit there laughing. I actually debated going out to the grocery store this week to buy a bottle of the, I can't believe it's not butter spray, that she would always spray on her bagels. Kira just wanted to see what that was about, and she decided that maybe it wasn't worth it. But maybe one day. Maybe one day. Kira said, I read Saba's emails about her being in the hospital, and one day Saba wrote that the nurses just sat her in a chair by their nursing station when she was being taken care of. And even in her altered mental state, she was still somehow entertaining everybody. That's just Safta, a contagious personality. She'd play Clue with us. She took us to the beach. We spent so many Thanksgivings, Passovers, Rosh Hashanahs, and many more moments with her. When I think of family and all that it entails, I think of Safta. So I think the biggest takeaway from Kira's words was there really was just never a dull moment with Safta. Michal shared that during her no sauce phase, there was a point where Michal wouldn't eat sauce on anything. I consider it a moment of a dietary malfeasance. Safta didn't know how to make her spaghetti and meatballs without sauce, so she just cooked them in soup. This was a decision that many people laugh or cringe at, but I credit her for the creativity. And Safta also just loved to help people. She went out of her way to get Michal a watercolor lesson from her neighbor who was an artist. And we, of course, can't forget her presentations at the Peabody Essex Museum that many people appreciated so dearly. I always found that Safta would just give me unending support and love throughout my whole life, whether I was kicking myself after a band concert that I didn't think I did well at, or just talking about prospective grad schools. She would always tell me that, you know, I'm amazing and I can get into MIT if I want to. It's hard to wrap our heads around the past 6 or 7 months. I would say we lost 3 giants in the family with Ted and Linda and Safta. But I think they would be happy to know how close we've been brought back together as a family. And I know Safta specifically would be furious if we did not gather for a big meal after this. It's impossible to capture Safta's essence in under 10 minutes like I have to now, but I hope that her presence can still be felt and that we can all carry her energetic spirit onwards.
It's such an honor to be here today and to participate with such a special family, a dear cherished colleague and friend, and all of you who have come together to honor the memory and the life of Reeva. I should say that when I met Reeva not so long ago, I referred to her as Mrs. Sagal, as one does in such a circumstance, and she said, "Honey, you can call me Safta." It was so tender and so dear, and I felt so welcomed by her instantly. And I should say that this was on a day that she was in the pit of grief. She was so generous and so warm, so loving and so welcoming. She even sat me down beside her and asked me, "Where are you from? Who's your family? Where did you grow up?" It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And it is no surprise that she has raised such beautiful children, has impacted the lives so deeply of her grandchildren, extended family, friends, and of course this cherished love with her husband. I'm honored to have been invited to participate today, and we will continue at the internment in just a short while. I invite you all to rise for the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamramim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashchina, B'Malo Kdoshim Uteorim Kezor Harakia Mazirim, Et Nishmat Rivka Bat Yaakov Rachel, שהלכה לעולמה, בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמתה, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה, לכן בעל הרחמים יסירה בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the sheltering wings of your presence in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament unto the soul of Rivka, the daughter of Yaakov and Rachel, Reeva, who has gone to her world, and for whose memory we pray. May her rest be in paradise. May the Master of Compassion bring her under the cover of God's wings and bind her soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be her heritage, and may she rest on her resting place in peace. And let us respond. Amen.